Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Todd. Thank you again for joining me for an exciting conversation. Today, I am joined by Chip Neuenschwander, who is an expert in this thing called discernment counseling. And essentially what this is if things are not going well in a relationship, what do you do? How do you make the decision on whether to stay and try to work things out or whether to leave? So, Chip, welcome. And let's start out by just, if you could share a bit about yourself and how you got into doing this, and just a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Todd. It is such a pleasure to be here with you. I've been looking forward to this all day. So hello to all of your listeners and watchers. So great to be here with you all. It is so funny, Todd, how our journey takes us to a place. I used to work for the Walt Disney Company, and the job that I had, we were kind of like, we considered ourselves to be the vanguard of guest service. And I got shouted at all day, every day for a long time. And I had no idea of knowing that that would be preparing me for what's next, because couples, they'll come in, now working as a licensed marriage family therapist, they'll come in and they have these really destructive patterns they get into, and it is hot in the room. Maybe not every time, all the time, but if you get into people's stuff, it's going to, you've been there, right?
Oh, yeah.
So for me, it started with my journey with discernment counseling started when I remember a couple coming in, and one person said, I want a divorce. And the other person said, I don't want to divorce. And I'm thinking, well, what do you guys want me to do? I didn't know what to do when you had a mixed agenda in the room. Do you want me to help you leave, or do you want me to help you stay? I don't know. And then a colleague told me about discernment counseling. And so I just dove head in. And I'm so grateful for it as just a method to be able to help people that are in this stuck place. My top choice for couples that are hurting would be couples therapy with a good couples therapist if they're interested in working on the problems in their marriage. But what do you do if one of you is no longer interested in that, but you're not ready to divorce yet? And so the purpose of discernment counseling is helping you when you have one spouse who's leaning out, the other one who's leaning in, and they're just kind of in this stuck place where it feels like they're in a thick fog and they can't get out of it. And so the purpose of discernment counseling isn't to build intimacy or to foster communication techniques. All of that would be putting the cart before the horse. The purpose is clarity about the future based on each person's contributions to the problems in the marriage. And so it's short term, 1 to 5 sessions, so you know you're not in the waiting room forever. It's built to be a compassionate intervention for people who are facing one of the biggest challenges of their lives.
So I totally relate with a lot of what you were saying, right? I mean, I've had a number of couples who come in, and it seems like one of them is really engaged and really interested in making this work, and the other, they say they're interested, but there just seems to be a different vibe, right? Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of couples, when they come in, it's like, man, I really want this to work. And you could tell there's just an energy there, right, where they both seem to be engaged. Even if they're having some conflict, they seem oriented around the relationship. And they seem to be kind of like oriented around engaging with each other and trying to figure this out. And I've had a number of couples who, when they come in, it's like one of the partners has kind of this odd block. There's almost like this, they're not kind of really showing up. They're saying some of the words, but it almost feels like they might be going through the motions or something like that. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, that's hard. And it's so good to be curious about that place. What's going on for them in that moment. If you're a couples therapist, you got to be ready for moments like that. You've got to be ready for, like, you have this deep emotional moment with one person and the other person, there's just nothing registering for them. Or you get the I don't know, the famous I don't know. What goes on for you when she's got the tears coming down her face and her chin is quivering doing the thing, and he's like, I don't know. And that can be a stumper for a lot of us. I think it's okay to lean into that, because to know that for the person who's in that place, they're still in the session for a reason. This relationship hopefully still matters to them, and it still distresses them to see their spouse or their partner in this uncomfortable place. And if all you can muster back is just kind of like, I don't know what to do in this moment, my body locks up, it's so good to be able to explore that with them and find out what that's about for them. How do you approach that, Dr. Todd, when you encounter that with people?
It's a tough deal, because sometimes it's hard to know whether somebody is just shutting down because they don't know how to navigate through those emotions,
right?
Or whether they're already checked out from the relationship.
Yeah.
And being able to differentiate that can be really hard sometimes. And so what I've found, I had this one couple one time, and this dude, I mean, I hate to make generalities, right? But in this case, it really kind of fit. It was this dude, he was kind of like this blue collar mechanic, this kind of dude who wouldn't know an emotion if it hit him on the side of the head, right? And his wife was like, God, it feels like, you're never here with me when I, contact you and share something. Instead of getting like a response, I just get like a thumbs up icon. And she felt like he was very disinterested, right? And when I spent some time with him, I was watching his body language, and I could just kind of see him hunch over a bit, which gave me a clue that some kind of emotional engagement was happening, but that he was shutting down. And the more that I worked with him, the more that I realized that he literally just did not have any language to put to what he was experiencing.
Yeah.
And had a difficult time knowing, like, well, if I love you, I mean, how do I say that, or how often? I mean, they just never had kind of normal, healthy relationship stuff modeled when he grew up. And so just by working with him and having him start to put some descriptors to the word, to just kind of what his body was experiencing, and being able to say that, and then being able to turn to her and even tell her some of the things that she feared, like, do you love me? Do you care about me? Are you going to be here? And he was able to say, yes, I don't know how to do that sometimes. That was even a breakthrough that we were able to build on for them to be able to communicate. So she understood a little bit more what was happening, so she didn't feel so abandoned by him. But that was very different from another couple that I had, where I have this thing that I call the notebook sign, where if a dude shows up with a notebook, he's not engaged. So I actually had two couples at the same time that I was working with, and the dude would sit there and write notes. And when I would challenge him on that, then he would start getting very, very defensive. But it was really a way of him making it all about her. That he would write down like what she said, to kind of like catch her in saying something that wasn't right. But it was really, no matter how much I tried to get through, there was a part of him that was already checked out of the relationship. And in these two instances, it was the guy, but I've also had it the other way around, where there was a woman who was already 1 foot out the door, and it just didn't feel like, no matter how much we kind of tried to pull to get something out of them, the people who were already checked out, it just didn't feel like they were willing to show up there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, we all do things. I mean, I think you and I share a love and appreciation for emotionally focused therapy. And you get around EFTers long enough, and they'll start talking about things like protective moves that we do, you know. And so, at the fundamentals of it, it's based in attachment, the science of attachment, which says that at our core, it's really quite simple. We long to know: are you there for me? Do I matter to you? If I call for you, will you respond? Are you engaged with me? And when it gets scary, without even realizing what we're doing, in a fraction of a second, out pops this thing. You know, some people turn the volume up. Some people retreat into something. They find something that gives them some source of stability. And sometimes it's hard to see how the thing that I do, and I do it too, Dr. Todd. Chip does it all the time. I have my protective moves too. Just check to make sure I have a pulse. Yes, I do it. And sometimes we do that thing, and that very thing is the thing that hurts the other person. And so, you know, if they're taking lots of notes, it feels safe to write this down. Or maybe if I use your own words and you hear your own words back, it's kind of like a video recording. So it's kind of like, hey, there, you see, this is how ouch my ouch feels. Maybe then you'll know. Maybe then you'll treat me better, and I won't feel so alienated from you right now. You know, and so a lot of times when they come into therapy, they know their partner's protective moves so well, you know, because you see out your eyes. It's very hard to see inwards, kind of a thing.
Oh yeah, and that they know each other's pattern well is one of the things that sometimes gets in the way, right, of people moving forward, right. Because the moment that even like there's a tone shift or a look, then there's this tendency to be like, oh my God, here we go again. You know, here it goes again, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the question of how do I know if I'm in this relationship where, you know, I'm struggling and or we're struggling, and it seems like, you know, conflict can never get resolved. It feels like we can never get attuned to each other. It feels like repair isn't possible. We just have to kind of like, you know, just pretend like nothing happened, because if we try to re-engage that conflict, it's just things escalate again. And it just feels frustrating. And how does a normal person tell whether the relationship is worth saving, or whether it's kind of time to just go, man, I think I might need to move on.
Right. Yeah. And I just want to voice how frustrating and discouraging that can feel. It's so difficult when it feels like one person, it feels like I keep trying. Hello, do you see me? I'm hurting over here. And quite often the other person hears that as an attack to say, hey, you're not doing enough. You're letting me down. And it can be very discouraging. You know, for couples, a lot of times, unfortunately, couples will wait for far too long before they come into couples therapy, which is understandable. I mean, there's a lot of things going on. We're all very busy. And then sometimes you just think, well, we can pull ourselves out of this tailspin together. It's not like we're throwing knives at each other all the time. It's just that we hit these really big tears. And when it comes to the place where they start considering divorce, that's when it's usually pretty clear when they're ready for discernment counseling, because they're using language, or at least the leaning out spouse is using language like, I can't do this anymore, I'm done. They may have even already talked to a family lawyer. That's very different from a couple that's discouraged. They keep getting stuck in the same cycle. They want to try to understand the problems, or they want to try to get it better, rather than somebody who's so discouraged they want to pull out altogether. When I'm checking in with somebody who says, how do I know whether I leave or whether I stay? Each situation is going to be a little bit different, or a lot different, and it's going to depend on your circumstances. So, in the discernment counseling world, we kind of talk about like hard reasons for divorce and soft reasons for divorce. Maybe you've heard about these, Dr. Todd. So your kind of hard reasons are those 3 A's, if it was abuse, affair, or adultery. So if they're coming in with that, if a spouse is addicted to narcotics or drunk all the time, or they says, hey, I'll stop cheating, and then they go back to that behavior, or they engage in any kind of violent or threatening acts, these are really going to tear down your sense of safety and trust. And by the way, if somebody's actually physically harming you, get safety. That's not the same thing as divorce, but I would encourage anybody who's being hurt or threatened with physical harm to seek some separation. But in terms of how dehumanizing that can be and wounding on so many levels if your spouse isn't willing to stop, and that's something that prompts you to consider about the future of your marriage. But I also work with couples who come back from these hard places and places of affairs that are no longer ongoing. I want to work with them to build a kind of like a coherent story or narrative, not just of the event, but of the impact of the bomb blast that went off in their lives, and that their unfaithful spouse can see how it impacted them. But Todd, more often than not, a lot of couples will come in for these so-called soft reasons for divorce. So it's things like we're just roommates, we're growing apart. There's no attentiveness, there's no affection. We just can't talk about anything without it going into meltdown. And so we just kind of keep the peace, which is terrible. It's horrible. Or maybe one of these really bad things has happened and they've never been able to heal it. I needed you and you weren't there. And so what I want to do in those moments is I want to know, as a counselor, where do you go when you get stuck? So even for a couple where there has been a trauma, how do you come together afterwards? How do you talk about the pain that you're experiencing? Is there healing there? And does that get you into a more stuck place too? So I'd want to distinguish between problems that have kind of become your relational imperatives versus those that are painful but potentially workable. So when I'm working with a leaning out spouse, person who's saying, I'm really thinking about divorce, I would want to know, what do you want to see different? What are you longing for? And then I want them to be able to convey that to their spouse in a non-accusatory way. So as we flesh those out, there might even be insight there too. And sometimes people are holding their marriage up against this ideal that no real relationship can meet. That happens especially as we keep hurting each other, and then your standards go up and up and up. And so often when spouses are hurting, they find themselves in this all or nothing thinking where even small efforts from their spouse, it's hard to see those or hear those because you've got the loudspeaker going of like, I can't trust this, I can't trust this. So it's really good to be thinking about those. And then finally, just like any long-term considerations, not just emotionally, but relationally, financially, and especially if there are kids involved. Usually, like I'll ask, what impact does your kids have on this? And then tear, because they're like, oh, we can't keep doing this to our kids. So there's a lot of layers to it, and it really depends on the person. But it can be rich with just helpful conversations that if you find the right person, it's challenging when you just go to your friend. You get that echo chamber. Yeah, leave him, girlfriend.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you said a lot of very important things. I want to touch on a couple of those, and then I want to dive a little bit deeper into discernment counseling and exactly what that is. But one of the things that you mentioned, and it made me think of something I tell couples all the time, right? That most couples do most things right most of the time. And even couples who end up getting divorced do most things right most of the time. It's just that there are certain points where, particularly during times of conflict or distress, where the inability to remain in a collaborative space with each other, but rather now turning toward each other and becoming adversarial starts to develop this emotional scar tissue where it becomes more and more difficult to feel present with each other. And those moments when things don't go well, because of the emotionality and because of the distress that is associated with them, oftentimes feel like that is everything, right? That everything in our relationship is awful when in fact, oftentimes most things are good. It's just that otherwise you would never have gotten together to begin with, right?
Right.
It's just that there are times when the ability to navigate through challenging situations where you need to turn to each other ends up being a situation where you engage in strategies that ends up pushing you apart. And that frustration and that sense of you're not here with me, either feeling like I can't do anything right, or you're always wrong, or whatever that emotional reaction is, can really start to drive a wedge between people. And your point about people waiting too long, man, I can't tell you how many heartbreaking stories I've heard where people call me and they're like, this is the situation. We're really struggling right now. And then, I'll spend some time talking through, kind of giving them a sense of what is going on, helping them frame the situation a little bit differently, and talking about some tools that we could start to work on in therapy to help them navigate through those difficulties in a different way. And only to have them say, well, I think we're just going to try to figure this out on our own, right? It's like, well, it's tough because if you already had those skills, you wouldn't be in the place that you're at, right? But oftentimes we come into relationships, we grow up in an imperfect world with imperfect parents, and we're imperfect people, right? And so we always bring some sensitivities and some triggers into relationships and some emotional baggage that, we need to kind of learn how to navigate through. And, some of those things can get triggered, particularly during times of conflict where it makes it very difficult to navigate through those times in a collaborative way and mutually supportive way with our partners, or if we can't, being able to repair afterwards. And a moment of sadness for me when people are resistant to getting help because there are some skills that can help them navigate through those times if they are truly seeking to get to reconnect, and instead oftentimes falling back into a pattern, a kind of a repetitive pattern that ends up pulling them apart.
And it's so discouraging for them because they're trying in the ways to connect, and they're laboring against a whole lot of things. I've checked in with reading your book and checking with some of your work, just how that fight or flight response can be so powerful. When you love somebody, nobody can scare you quite like the person who you want to give your heart to, right? And at the time that you need that calmness the most, the time you need to be able to summon up the strength to be able to say, hey, I need you right now. Hey, don't pull away from me. I need your reassurance to know that I matter to you. That's the time when the critical part pops out, because that's what's calling the shots in that moment. It's like, okay, cerebral cortex, get out of the driver's seat. I'm driving. So it's hard, and it is hard I can see how it'd be hard for you and for us as therapists saying, oh no, your brain already starts thinking about, okay, I've got a map. I know how I could be helpful. But yeah, and people have to wait till they're ready too.
Yeah. And, unfortunately some just end up not making it. Some of those relationships just end up not making it. So, yeah. Chip, I'd like to chat just a little bit more about about discernment, the discernment process, and yeah. I know I've gone through some of the training with the Doherty Institute and all of that, yeah. But could you just describe where did that come from, and how is that different from therapy?
So it's different than couples therapy, because couples therapy, the foundation is that both of you are open to exploring and hopefully resolving the challenges in your relationship. And I'll just say it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work from both of you. but it's designed to foster connection, so it can be the very best kind of work you can engage in. In discernment counseling, one of you're just not ready for that yet. Your big part of you is saying, I can't trust this. I can't trust that I'm willing to do this. I'm not ready for any of that. So it's not trying to fix the problems that create such pain for you both. You're not trying to change the dance that you do. That's for couples therapy, hopefully good couples therapy. Instead, we're helping the couple gain clarity and confidence about a key decision, and that's this. Should we try to restore this relationship to good health, or should we move towards separation? And it's amazing how we can get that done in a short period of time. It's just 1 to 5 sessions. And instead of focusing on solving relational problems right away, we're really laser guided focused on understanding how the couple got here, what each person's contributions have been, and whether there's enough willingness to try to even attempt to repair.
Is it the willingness that is the key? That it really comes down to, are you both willing to commit to restoring the relationship, or is one person just unwilling to do? Is it really that willingness? Is that the key to whether to move forward with therapy or not?
Sure. For some spouses, that's the big deal. So they'll say, I don't even want to work on this relationship. And so then I'm not going to push back against that. I'm just gauging what that looks like for them. And I mean, it sounds, in a case like that, it sounds like it's a pretty strong argument for divorce. And so I would want to work with them collaboratively to say, okay, this is a strong argument that you might want to end this relationship, forever, at least in the way that it is. But if we were to look at if good couples therapy was able to get you to a place where you would want that, is that something that you would even be interested in? So if, let's say, miracles were possible and you were able to have a change of heart while still being who you are and still sticking to the parts that you don't like. There are certain things they'll come in, they say, I can't keep doing this. I'm not going to keep doing this the way I've been doing this. And I want to say, absolutely. That's going to have to be one of the priorities of couples therapy if that's what you want to do. So if their want isn't there, I want to gauge, okay, do you even want the want? I mean, would you even be open to like having a fruitful marriage? And so that, I mean, a big piece for discernment counseling isn't to try to pigeonhole them one way or the other, is to help give them the freedom to look at things clearly, to say, okay, I feel, I'll backtrack and say, Todd, it's difficult when you're in this place, when you are deciding whether I should stay or whether I should leave. I mean, imagine trying to train a bunch of pigeons on like a little toy teeter-totter, but they keep moving back and forth. That's what it's going on inside of somebody who's saying, should I stay or should I leave? They're torturing themselves nonstop to say, this is so horrible. I don't want to stay in this, but it is so frightening and it could cause so much damage to leave. So they're stuck in this place. And so this is a safe place where I can just hold them and be with them there in that uncomfortable tension, and not try to push them one way or the other, but often just sitting there on that uncomfortable teeter-totter, new insights can come out. And it's not, they don't have to keep circling and circling and circling. We can really explore what each of those paths can look like for them.
One of the things that came up for me as I was listening to you, right, is, couples where one partner who's, what you call leaning out, right, is the one who's thinking about divorce, is like, I can't continue living this way. I don't want to continue living this way. So I'm out, right? I'm done. And how much of that happens with people, in your opinion, who just kind of have been so wounded that they're just like, there's just literally nothing that you can say that would ever make me want to reattach with you, versus somebody who is like, I am so afraid of being hurt again that I am afraid to trust. And so because I am too afraid to trust, opening up myself again, It's like, if a miracle would occur and none of the history would happen, I would love to be in this relationship, but I just can't trust that enough will change for me not to be re-hurt. So even though it feels like I'm pulling roots out of the ground, I feel like I have to do this in order to protect myself.
Yeah. That is real. And so couples, spouses who invite themselves into the brave place of saying, do I want to try discernment counseling, or do I want to continue on to the path that's couples therapy? To know that mistrust is there, and it takes a patient counselor who's able to sit with both of them, because if you're the person who's leaning in, that can feel really discouraging. But to know that distrust has to be there, because the math just isn't in that spouse's favor. They have had time after time after time where they've been thrown off the horse. And I'm going to be right there with them. If I've been thrown off the horse 100 times, I'm not going to get back on horses. I just hear the horse go, wee, and I'm out. I don't want this. And so it's a terrible tension that they're living in, because they long for this sense of connection. They long for a relationship in which they feel valued and understood and cared for, and all the lovely things they hoped for in the beginning. But at the same time, their protective part comes up and says, I'm not going to let you do this to yourself. We're going to keep you safe. So that is a real place that they get into. The other part of the equation, and just to validate that, just to really acknowledge that I'm never going to push against the distrust. I'm going to honor that. And because that's real, that's the wisdom of your body. When you feel your stomach tighten up, when you feel it in your chest, your body's like, I can't trust this. And my hope is that your partner will be able to see what kind of pain that you're in. And sometimes it leads to shame, but it takes a little bit of work, and it takes me continually saying, okay, I want to slow this down. I want to understand what's going on for you. For the other part, the part where they're just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm ready to be done. I have a pet theory, and I don't think I'm the only one, that I think a big reason for divorce is the very thing you mentioned before, Todd, this part where, like, every time we try to fix this thing, it still gets worse. I mean, if you had a car and it breaks down, okay, but every time you take it to the mechanic, then they break it too. You're just like, well, I guess I'm just going to ride bicycles for the rest of my life. I mean, at some point, because that's what will happen a lot of times for the person who's leaning out. They're like, I tried to fix this many, many, many times. And every time I did, you stonewalled me, or you got defensive, or you wouldn't hear me, or something horrible happened. And they've had this experience probably not once, twice, 3 times, but probably maybe hundreds of times. And so they just reach to a place of doneness that they're like, no. I've tried to repair this. I don't even want to repair this anymore. And if they ultimately do decide to separate or divorce, I mean, that's what discernment is all about, helping them find clarity, not pushing them against their will into a place where they don't want to go.
So discernment counseling is something that I don't think most people have ever heard of, right? It's a little bit of a specialty practice, and it's extraordinary and very powerful and very enlightening. And I wish that more people knew about it. Just for the people who are listening to this, could you kind of walk everybody through, like, what does that look like? Like, if I was part of a couple that showed up in your office and we're like, you know what, we're trying to make a determination of whether to get divorced or not. We tried couple therapy, and they suggested that we come to you for this discernment process. How does that unfold? What does that look like?
Yeah, great question. So I do an intake over the phone with each partner, each spouse separately. So they already know me going in. But when they come into the room, you can feel, it's a different feeling usually for discernment counseling than it is for couples therapy. With discernment, you can feel it. There's an emotional something, an imbalance in the room, usually. The leaning out person is leaning towards divorce or separation, and so they may be on the edge of the couch, or they're really in a place where their guard is all the way up. The leaning in spouse is wanting to make the relationship work quite often, and so there might be anxiety about that, or just like, hey, can't you just come around and do this thing now? They're with the leaning in spouse, they're holding on to like this anxiety. Usually, they might glance sideways towards their spouse, and if asked a question, the answer may come back in a torrent, like from a fire hose, because their spouse may have been completely walled off from them. And the leaning in person is saying, I'll do anything to make this work sometimes. Sometimes they're confused. They're often surprised by this. They're nearly always in a lot of just really gut-wrenching pain. For the leaning out partner, they tend to be more withdrawn, which is weird because sometimes they were once the person who's like turns up the volume, they're the pursuer, and now they're shutting down. Their guard is way, way, way up. They've often been thinking about leaving for a long time, and they may feel emotionally exhausted or even completely numb. And, from their perspective, they have tried to work on the marriage, and now any overtures from their leaning in spouse is like, okay, where was this 5 years ago? Too little, too late. And it can be very strange for both of them because often the person who was the pursuer becomes withdrawn and vice versa. And then the more the pursuer pulls back, the more now your new, like the leaning in spouse, they try to compensate. And so in discernment counseling, I'm not going to try to push either of them to a conclusion or judge them for where they're at. I don't want them to do to themselves what the pattern between them has already done to them. I want to slow things down as I meet with each spouse individually. So first I'll meet with them as a couple, then I'll meet with them individually, and I want to get very curious about them. I want to help them reflect on what their pain looks like, but also what their own role in the relationship looks like, not just what the other person has done to them. And then there's a part where I have them kind of share their takeaways with one another. And I invite them to come back for another discernment counseling session if they found it productive. So it's very, very low pressure. If you try to put pressure on, you're just going to chase your leaning out spouse around the barn. It's not going to work. You're trying to invite them to a place of what it is that they want, given all the considerations that are on the table. What were their contributions? The impact for kids. A big piece for a lot of them, they tried couples therapy already, and I want to know how that went. For a lot of them, they're like, well, look where we are right now. And then also just checking in with them, have they ever experienced any kind of joy or delight in their relationship, and what did that look like? So that's a little bit of a quick overpass of what discernment counseling can look like when you're in it.
So we've used a lot of terms like leaning out, pursuing, leaning in, withdrawal.
Yes.
Could you just, for the sake of people who may not know some of that lingo, can you describe a little bit about what you're talking about? And when we talk about a pattern and things like that, kind of in layman's terms, what are those things referring to in a relationship?
Sure. Yeah. I'm so grateful for all of these studies that we're finding now that really supports that we were built to be connected to one another. It's not a weakness to seek out the person who's most important to you, your secure person, and say, hey, I'm really shook up over here. I need to know that I matter to you. That would really help me. We're finding that it's so much easier to co-regulate with somebody. It's like 30 times easier than to self-regulate. You can do it. It's just so much nicer when your person is there. The downside is it's always a high-risk proposition to give your heart to someone. When you're in a relationship with someone, it asks a lot of you. You want to be open and vulnerable, but what we all do is we have moments when we scare one another. We kind of polarize each other without even meaning to. And so with one person, when they feel ignored, she might experience her volume go up because you're not hearing me. So I'll just say it louder. I'll wave my arms bigger. I'll say, hey, listen, I don't like this. And then what will happen is her spouse hears not a message of I need you right now, but I'm attacking you right now. And so his shields go up in a fraction of a second. His nervous system takes over and says incoming. And so then he then sends her this message, not only that she can't come to him with her hurt, but she gets this painful message that, frankly, my dear, I really could care less about you. And so that is bound to send her to this terrible place where her options become extremely limited. And they just end up doing the same old dance that they always do. And quite often, one of you is the person who turns the volume up. The other one is like, this is scary, stop rocking the boat, turn the volume down. And so you have like this kind of pursuer person who will push and blame and criticize without even meaning to. It's just, that's what you get driven to, while the other person kind of withdraws, they shut down, they avoid, they create this defense. Well, look at how I'm doing all these other amazing things over here. Stop focusing on your pain. And the more one does their part, the other one pulls back into doing their part. And over time, it becomes this cycle. It's predictable, it's painful, and it's exhausting. And what's important is that both people experience it as the other person keeps hurting me. You keep doing the thing to me that causes me such damage. If you really loved me, you'd stop doing this. And so what we want to do in couples therapy and in discernment counseling, my personal take is to try to help them understand the dance moves they go through when the music starts playing. And the fact that both of them, I'll tell you, Todd, I haven't encountered a moment where both of them were like, I have no idea what you're talking about when you say what happens next. They're able to describe it to me. They can describe their dance to me. And that tells me something very powerful. This isn't just a metaphor. This is really this force that takes them over. And so if one of your listeners is hearing this and saying, well, my spouse, I've read the DSM and I can tell you they've got several narcissistic qualities and that really hurts me. And so I'm not saying that you ignore the things that your spouse does to protect themselves and hurts you. Just the opposite. I'm saying I want to know how that impacts you right down to your toes. I want to know what it does in your nervous system, what it leaves you thinking and feeling. And then how few options that leaves you to do next. I want to understand and have your partner understand what it feels like to be trapped in that no-win situation that you are in. So in couples therapy, I just want to draw out the scenario for both of you to see together. You get clobbered by your cycle anytime it wants to take you over, and then you don't have much chance of uniting to see it as the common enemy instead of one another. In discernment counseling, I've just got you for a short period of time, so I want to see if you're open to even having those kinds of conversations. If you're even willing to say, this is what happens inside of me, and I can see how that would drive you to a place where your guard comes up. And so that's kind of how those two kind of come apart. So yeah, it is funny we use these terms, isn't it? And I'll just pull back and say real quick, just because you do pursuing things doesn't mean you're like this pursuing, criticizing monster. That's just the strategy that you use. And if you withdraw, it doesn't mean you're this withdrawn person. It's just that's the strategy that's come to your aid in a moment when you're frightened and you need something.
One of the things that you said that I think is absolutely true is that regardless of whether, when this feeling of disconnection happens, whether you're the person that, the emotions escalate and all of a sudden there's this wanting to get the other person to engage and, and oftentimes sometimes people say incredibly mean things that later they're like, I can't believe I said that.
Right.
But, if we can kind of put an emotional attachment lens over that situation, oftentimes what we see is that when we become hypercritical, when we raise our voice, these are not necessarily intended to demean or belittle or attack, but are attempts at getting people to getting our partner present, for getting them to understand what we're experiencing, to get them to be, to engage with our distress. But we're oftentimes using the very tools that push them away. And the way that you described, regardless of whether you're the person who feels like this, this emotional angst just kind of flows over you, and you become what we call the pursuer, who is you kind of using aggression or anger or loud voices or whatever to get the other partner to engage, or you're the one who shuts down. There's this sense that their partner is doing something to us. They're hurting us in some way, whether it's I'm feeling criticized and I'm feeling like I'm attacked and I'm shamed and blamed. I can never do anything right, and it doesn't matter what else I do. And all that matters is the one thing, she's mad about. Or on the other side, it's like, you know what? Every time I try to turn to you for support, or I'm upset, you go away, right? You're not there. You don't hear me. It's like I don't feel like I can trust. And when I've like you, when I describe this pattern for people, they oftentimes just like look at each other and grin or kind of chuckle a little bit, because they're like, have you been watching us or something?
Right.
Do you live in our house? Because it is just such a common thing that human beings do. And and unfortunately, unless we learn some skills on how to engage differently when things start escalating, we can really kind of undermine that sense of connection with each other.
Yeah.
And so when people go through discernment counseling, what are kind of the paths forward from that? Once they go through that process, kind of then what?
Yeah. What I like about discernment counseling is I was reading a study that says if you have only two options, they've done this longitudinal study. If you have only two options, you got like a 50-50 chance of making the wrong decision. But just by adding another option, it makes it easier for you to not feel locked into like a flip of the coin. So I appreciate that in the wisdom of setting up discernment counseling, there's actually three paths. And couples do choose one of three. So the first path is status quo. We don't do anything. We don't move towards divorce yet. We're not ready for couples therapy yet. We're just going to be in a holding pattern. And most couples say, bleh, I don't want that at all. That just sounds like more of the same. But there are couples that for different reasons that makes the most sense to them. Maybe they have kids and they don't feel ready to do anything just yet. And so they choose that path. And some couples do get better. We're finding now that for people who are thinking about divorce, this isn't to diminish. If you're thinking about divorce, it's not to say it's not real. It's just saying what we're finding in studies that if they tracked them 1 year later, more than 30% of them were not thinking about divorce 1 year later. So it's just good to realize that you got a 1 in 3 shot that something may change and you don't maybe even have to do anything. I mean, I feel funny saying that as a counselor, that's my calling in life, but you may find it to get better that way. The second path is divorce. And that is really hard. It is, for those of us who've been through divorce, it is painful. It's a legal solution to a relational problem. And you basically have to like Rambo, stitch yourself up and keep moving even as you're bleeding. But it may be the decision that a lot of couples will make when they face discernment counseling, and that's okay. It's not a failure because you've tried and you're trying to make the right decision that's best for you and your family. The third path is reconciliation. We are going to find a very good couples therapist who's able to help us track down what our pattern is, not just give us tips and tricks and things like that, go on more date nights and that kind of thing, but they're actually going to help us get to the root of where we get stuck. And there's a cap on that. So we ask them to commit for 6 months. And then at the end of 6 months, if it's still not working out, you may choose path 2, which is divorce after all, but you have turned over every rock. So those are kind of the three paths that we invite couples to think about.
What is your opinion about trial separations? I've had a couple couples who have gone through that, and it seems like there's never any reconciliation after that. But what's your experience? What's your opinion of kind of like, well, let's separate for 4 months, or let's separate for 6 months and see how it goes.
Right. I know that can be kind of a loaded gun, because there are couples therapists, and very good couples therapists who I respect a lot, who will advocate for that. And I can see the merit of why they're advocating for it, because it's giving each person peace. And it cuts down on the negativity that can be so destructive. And maybe sometimes it's just like, especially in cases of where there's abuse and it's ongoing, you may just need to get out of there, and you're not ready to divorce just yet. But you need safety. So I can get that. What I'll get quite a bit as people are coming in for discernment counseling is they've already taken the initiative to move out. And so they're in this place where they say, I feel so much peace now that we're separated, I can't possibly imagine going back. And that's important. I want to respect that. If they feel peace, that's their body saying, I like this. I don't have to live with this tension anymore. It's far less triggering. There's less arguing. There's less emotional intensity. And that resulting peace is very reassuring. But that doesn't automatically answer the key question that we would want to get into of whether the relationship itself is beyond repair. So I would want to get clarity with that spouse that's feeling that sense of peace, to ask the deeper question: does that peace reflect clarity about the relationship, or just relief from the conflict that you're experiencing, which is completely natural? I would want relief from that too. And it's hard because there's little or no trust there that there can be hope for change in the relationship. When you're in this place of disconnection for so long, it's hard to get that. It's really hard to get that painful message that tells you you're alone and the other person doesn't want to be on your team. So the part that makes it difficult to consider working on the relationship is that for many, the statistics, like we talked about before, it just hasn't been in your favor. Your heart just remembers how many times you've been hurt. You've tried and you've failed to experience connection. And it really takes a whole lot of courage to imagine a different kind of relationship than the one you've known, at least for a long time. So it's not that I want you to go back to that version of the relationship. I want you to understand what that version would look like for you if you were to explore that with your spouse, a different kind of relationship. I guess the thing that makes separation hard is you're going to really need to get those wins in there. You're going to really need some different interactions to let you know it's okay to trust again, that we can land this plane without it going down in flames. And if you're never talking to each other, that can make it a challenge. I guess you have to do what you believe is right for your relationship and for your own sense of peace. But my hope for you is that you would find a good couples therapist at the very least to say, okay, let's try to have new conversations and explore what breaks down for you both. And then in addition to that, I don't know, what do you think, Dr. Todd? Do you encourage them to go on date nights and say, even if you're separated, you should still see each other sometime? It's a challenge.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of trial separations,
Yeah.
and I'm not a fan of kind of like setting up date nights per se,
Right.
because some of that stuff it seems a little performative, but it doesn't really address the underlying disconnect.
Yeah.
It's not, people going on date nights. It's great. I mean, people should do that just as a matter of principle, right? To set aside some time to spend with their partner in a just kind of in a fun situation where you both can just take pleasure in whatever's going on and just being with each other is always a good thing. But
Sure.
as far as a strategy for fixing a relationship where things are not going well, I don't find that to be particularly helpful, because usually what is underlying that disconnect is a pattern of interaction. It's a pattern of communication and how people manage their own emotions when they're with each other. That is really the culprit, right? There's some breakdown there, and going on a date night doesn't really a address that. A a more important thing, I think, is to be able to just do some, engage in some strategies for let's learn how to communicate differently, so that we don't end up triggering each other. But as far as the trial separations, I've thought a lot about this, and your whole point of the safety thing. I mean that there's just no question if there's any kind of domestic violence, and I've worked with some couples where people do almost like mind-numbingly cruel things to each other, and in situations where there's some kind of concern for safety, I mean that's a no-brainer. It's just you have to get out of there, because you literally cannot work on anything. You cannot move forward in any way if you don't feel safe. Safety is the fundamental. It is the foundation of any relationship. If there's no sense of safety, nothing else can happen. But when there's not that concern, when there's not a sense of safety, but rather just a sense of disconnection, what I have found, and I'm with you. I know that there are some who can use this in an effective way. I just haven't found it to be that effective, because what I've found happens is that people start developing patterns of having a life apart. Mm-hmm. And there just isn't the same imperative to work things out. I mean, if you're both on a sinking ship, there's a bit of an emotional imperative to work collaboratively to try to get this figured out. If you're now like on two separate islands, and there's a ship in the middle between you with a hole in it, there's just less of kind of this sense of imperative to try to repair that. But again, I know that different people have different experiences, but that's just what I have found.
Sure. And as you're talking, Todd, it makes me think of blended families. So that's its own kettle of fish. And sometimes the kids will come into the blended family saying, I like my new stepmom, and then something will happen. And then now there's turmoil with one of the stepkids. And so I have experienced situations where they made the painful decision to live separately, even though they're married, as painful as that sounds, but they eventually were able to come back together. So I know there's so many stories out there. And I mean, I see it, but for, me going through it, I wouldn't be able to shake my finger and say, now, it's hard. These relationships are hard work, and you throw kids in there and like previous relationships, and oh my goodness gracious.
Oh man, do it? I know. I get it. I totally get it. So, if somebody were to come up to you, right, at a dinner party or something, and say, Chip, I hear that you do, you work with couples who are thinking about getting divorced, and how do I know whether I should leave? Right? What's kind of what would you say to them?
Yeah. I mean, that's the really, that's $1 million question right there, right? Hopefully they. That would be hilarious, wouldn't it? Somebody comes up to you at a dinner party. Can you help me make a decision? And he's sitting right there, like her husband's sitting right there. Awkward. But I think it's if the person is asking that, we kind of alluded to how they feel like they're in this place where they're stuck. They're in this place with that teeter-totter, and they're not sure which way to go. And depending on the day or the hour, they may be feeling differently. And it's yucky, and they want to get out of the yuck. But then if I get out of the yuck, more problems ensue. And so it's just like, it's difficult. It's a hard place to be. I guess I wouldn't want to push them one way or the other towards staying or leaving. My job I'm not on the clock if I'm there over dinner. Let's just say they come to me as a client. My job is to help them slow down and listen more carefully to both sides, that internal conflict that they're experiencing. What will happen is they'll get off on one task and they'll circle on this over here, and it's all over the place. I mean, if you could see inside the mind and the soul of somebody who's really deliberating about their marriage, it's not a pleasant place to be. It's very distressing. It's very painful. And I mean, just imagine carrying a really heavy backpack and everything inside you wants to set that backpack down, but you dare not set it down because if you do, destruction is waiting. And so they're in this place. So I'd want to know what's led you to this point. What have you tried so far? What would you need to see in order to consider working on the relationship? And again, I really want to know about what their dance looks like. What does your pattern look like? Todd, I remember, did you ever go to one of these amusement parks, like these theme parks, and you think that looks like a fun ride right there, and then you're locked in and you realize it does a lot of twirling and flipping, and you're like, how do I get out of this thing? And there's no getting out of it. You realize this was a terrible mistake. And so leaning out spouses, they'll convey something that feels like this horrible merry-go-round they can't get out of. They get this clear message that their partner is shutting them out or doesn't want to hear from them. And I really want to understand them. I want to say, when that happens, what do you experience? This dance you keep doing over and over, what does that look like and feel like for you? What happens for you when you get that painful message that the person who's supposed to be there for you doesn't want to hear from you? What do you do then? Do you get louder? Do you get quieter? And if there has been a significant harm to the relationship, I can think of several cases where I'll just pick on the wife again. Maybe she went through a scare medically and her husband wasn't there for her. And so that's the most frightening thing you can go through as a person. And they've never been able to resolve that. And I want to know what that's like and just not just sweep it under the rug. I really want to know what's going on for them. Because oftentimes it's not a clear answer at all. It's just a sense that I'm feeling really defeated right here in this place. I've tried and tried and tried and tried. Too many failed repair attempts. I don't know what to do. We can't fix this thing. So I'm giving up. And so it may be that you try couples therapy and you say, you know what, that was our last try and it didn't work, but you tried. Or it may be that you say, we don't want to try anymore. So then that's fine. So you send this clear message to your person to say, this is not something I'm willing to work on anymore. And so one way or the other, it's good to get people out of the waiting room to where they're able to either work on it or say, what's next?
So in these last few minutes, I just want to kind of open it up to you, just to share whatever you think is you haven't said, or what are some of the things that you think are important for people to know?
Yeah. Well, there's grieving here, because if you are married, you entered into it with the hopes of a dream of having this wonderful companion who you can do life with. You share your stories with, you conquer the world together, they have your back, you're intimate together. There's all these wonderful fruits that you were hoping that would happen. And instead, it could be, like you said, Todd, it could be that it's not all the time, but it's enough times to where you're like, this is so horrible. We keep getting stuck in the same place over and over and over again, and we can't get out of it. And when that happens, I can't begin to express how definitive everything starts to feel. It starts to feel like we will never change. We've tried everything. Maybe this is just who we are, especially if a couple has tried couples therapy and it didn't work. The thing you start thinking is, well, maybe it's us. And so in many cases, what feels so final is a place to reflect on what it feels like to be stuck in that pattern that neither of you personally maybe fully understands yet. And I've seen couples who have felt completely hopeless come to understand their relationship in a new way. And that understanding opened doors they didn't know were there. And so they felt invited to go into a place where would couples therapy make sense for us, and what would need to be in place? What kind of personal agendas for change would I need for myself, and I would hope that my partner would have? And then also, I've seen people who've come to a clear grounded decision to separate, not out of hopefully reactivity, but out of deep thought and integrity. And so from a discernment counseling perspective, that's not defeat. The defeat would be as if you didn't have any source of clarity, any greater clarity going through the process. And just, I mean, we're mental health people, so we have to say this, but I really do want to say this. If you're going through this, be good to yourself. Try to get some rest. Try to, you have to remind yourself to eat food sometimes that's nourishing and good for you. Hopefully you have people in your corner who love you, that you can turn to, who say, you really do have a lot of value. You're a sweet person. You just want to watch out for when they're like, yeah, get out of there. Because sometimes without realizing it, when I'm hurting, I'll just say the hurt parts and I forget to say, oh, well, there are these other parts too. So, yeah. And then, Todd, this is a lot of fun being with you here today. I was looking forward to this. I enjoy your company, and I know your listeners and your viewers enjoy you too. So it's just fun to bask in the glow.
Well, thank you very much, Chip. So where do people find you? If somebody wants to know more about your work or get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Yeah. So I have a private practice called Wyzetta Counseling. It's a funny name for a town in Minnesota, WAYZATA counseling.com, all one word. I also have a YouTube channel that's just my name right now. It's not as successful as yours, but I'm trying to put out successful parts about resolving relationship things. But probably the best way is just to find me on my website. You can email me, call me, I get you a referral if you need a referral. Yeah.
And Chip, you actually have a great YouTube channel. You may not have a ton of stuff on there yet, but man, the stuff that you have on there is absolutely spectacular. So I'd encourage everybody to go over to Chip's channel, hit the subscribe button and watch his videos. He's really, really got great stuff. Chip, I want to thank you so much for joining the conversation today. This has been amazing, and I look forward to having you on again. Thank you very much.
Todd, you are a real hoot, and don't let anybody tell you different.
Okay, awesome. We'll see you later, everybody.